Here's the thing: character and integrity. Two things that seem to be disappearing in our culture today. I'm going to tell you two stories about one city. And at the end, you tell me which one of the stories produced more character and integrity. The city is Chicago. Here we go. Story one. Sometime back, Al Capone virtually owned Chicago. Al Capone wasn't famous for anything heroic. No, he was notorious for immersing the Windy City in everything, from bootleg liquor and prostitution to murder. But Capone had a lawyer nicknamed Easy Eddie. Easy Eddie was Capone's lawyer for good reason. Eddie was good at what he did. In fact, he was so good at legal maneuvering that he kept Big Al out of prison for a long time. To show his appreciation, Capone paid Easy Eddie very well. And he also afforded him some special dividends. For instance, Easy Eddie and his family lived in a fenced-in mansion with live-in help and all the conveniences of that day. The estate was so large it took up an entire Chicago city block. Easy Eddie was living the high life of the Chicago mob, and he gave little consideration to the atrocities that went on all around him. But Easy Eddie did have one soft spot. He had a son that he loved dearly. And he gave his son the best of everything: best clothes, best cars, even gave him a great education. Nothing was withheld, and money was no object. And even though Easy Eddie was involved in organized crime, he even tried to teach his son right from wrong. But with all his wealth and affluence, there was two things he knew he couldn't give his son. He couldn't give him a good name, and he couldn't give him a good example. One day, Easy Eddie came to a difficult decision. He wanted to try and rectify all the wrong he had done. So he decided he'll go to the authorities and tell the truth about Al Scarface Capone. Try and rectify his tarnished name and leave his son some semblance of integrity. But he knew that in order to do this, he'd have to testify against the mob, and that would come at a great price. So he testified. By the end of that year, Easy Eddie's life came to an end in a blaze of gunfire on a lonely Chicago street. But in Easy Eddie's mind, he had given his son the greatest gift he could ever give him at the greatest price he would ever have to pay. At the crime scene, the police pulled out of Easy Eddie's pocket a rosary, a crucifix, a religious medallion, and a poem clipped from a magazine. The poem read, "The clock of life is wound but once, and no man has the power to tell just when those hands will stop, at late or early hour. Now is the only time you own. Live, love, and toil with a will, and place your faith in God alone, for the clock may soon be still." Character and integrity. Story 2. World War II had many heroes. One such man was Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hara. He was a fighter pilot assigned to the aircraft carrier Lexington in the South Pacific. One day, his whole squadron was sent out on a mission. And when he was airborne, he looked down at his fuel tank and realized someone had forgotten to top off his fuel, and he wouldn't have enough fuel to complete his mission and return back to the fleet. He informed his flight leader, which ordered him to return back to the fleet. Reluctantly, he fell out of formation and headed back to the fleet. On his way to the fleet, he saw something that turned his blood ice cold. A squadron of Japanese aircrafts were making their way towards the fleet. All of the fighters from the fleet were out on maneuvers, and the fleet was all but defenseless. He couldn't reach his squadron and bring them back in time to save the fleet, nor could he warn the fleet of the incoming danger. There was only one thing he could do. He'd have to somehow divert them from the fleet. Laying aside all thoughts of personal safety, he dove into the Japanese squadron, 50 caliber gun blazing as he dove in. Butch dove in and out of the now broken formation and fired on as many aircrafts as possible until all his ammunition was spent. Undaunted, he continued the pursuit in hopes of clipping a wing or a tail and making the enemy aircrafts unfit to fly. Finally, exasperated, the Japanese squadron took off in a different direction. Deeply relieved, Butch O'Hare and his tattered fighter headed back to the fleet. Upon arriving at the fleet, he informed them of the circumstances surrounding his return. The film in the camera that was mounted on the wing of his aircraft showed them the extent of Butch's courage to try to save the fleet. He had in fact destroyed 5 enemy aircrafts. This happened on February 20th, 1942, and for that act, Butch O'Hare became the Navy's first ace of World War II and the first naval aviator to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. Sadly, a year later, Butch was killed in an aerial assault at the age of 29. But his hometown would not let the courage of this man fade. And today, O'Hare International Airport in Chicago is named in tribute to the courage of this great man. So the next time you're at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, think about stopping in and visiting Butch's memorial. It has his aircraft and his Congressional Medal of Honor. It's located between Terminal 1 and Terminal 2. Character and integrity. The mob lawyer. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? The war hero. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, what does that scripture have to do with Butch O'Hare? Well, like Paul Harvey used to say, now for the rest of the story. Butch O'Hare was Easy Eddie's son. Character and integrity. It must be taught, but more importantly, it must be modeled. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And if you didn't know, now you know.